This is the Magic of Writing lecture by Garrett Ford, and with the companion slides to my quick crash course to writing, which is being offered on January 22nd, 2026 in Lloydminster, Alberta. First, I'd like to start off explaining that I'm not going to teach you to be writers. If you have a story in your heart and a pen and paper in front of you, or maybe you're dictating into a recorder, well, guess what? You are already a writer. So all I'm seeking to do is help you learn the practice of this art. In the same way that Harry Potter was already a wizard and noticed how odd things happened around him his whole life, you too have looked at the world through different eyes and saw it maybe strangely, maybe feeling like an outsider amongst other people, feeling too much, or being too excited, being too passionate. You've been maybe pushed down and told by those muggles around you that it's all been done before, there are no great stories, there is no way to do it. But I say hogwash. Just as Mr. Potter had lived in his little cupboard and before Hagrid knocked on the door and said, "You're a wizard, Harry, and welcome to the world of magic and honing his skills, so do I welcome you." And so this is your invitation, because to me, writing is magic, because words are magic. I work in a field where you heal people by talking and listening. And if that's not magic, well, I don't know what is. And you might say, no, pull a rabbit out of the hat. And I say, what use is a rabbit being pulled out of a hat compared to healing a broken heart or removing trauma from 20 years hence? So through this lecture, I'll be using magical terms to discuss the art of writing, because really, that's what it is. Another intention I have is I do not want to inspire anybody to try emulate me or try to be the next me or some other writer that you have maybe put up on a pedestal, for they have all come and gone already. Instead, I want to help you become the first you, the first whatever writer you're going to develop into. And so I'm going to give you some of my tips and tricks and tactics that I've used and found helpful, and take what you want and leave all the rest, even if it is nothing else than the last line on the last slide, the only good advice that I know I can offer you, which is, please, don't eat the foil on the Easter eggs. There are people who are not writers, though, and if you're watching this and you're not, then go and take your idea out of your head and plug it into an algorithm and have some computer arrange some words in the most likely combination, and then you can have a chapter pumped out and slap your name on it and pretend that it's yours. But that's not writing. You're just a computer's editor. You're a stagehand to another magician. And like Penn and Teller is compared to Gandalf, if you were ever asked about the symbolism of a certain passage or what inspired your book, all you'll be able to say is a shrug and a sigh and, well, a computer wrote it for me. I would call them a hack, but that insults hacks. So I hope that you, whoever you are, wherever you are, will enjoy my advice and enjoy the magic of writing. First, a little bit of disenchantment. We need to dispel something before we dive into the lecture. One of the most common things that is said but never explained by well-vetted writers is the show, don't tell. You've heard them say, and I'm going to explain what that all means. I say use both, but let's go into it. Showing is where you're being subtle, descriptive, and nuanced, and using the subtext of the words. So, for instance, my passage here, the back door creaked open, silent as a May Day marching band. My dear husband waddled like an errant shadow beneath the clock that was just 3 minutes to midnight. Hair a ruffle of sweaty blonde, tie undone, collar upturned, streaked red. My stomach, a Gordian knot churning leftover spaghetti. I waited Your dinner got cold. Clearing my throat, I almost choked. That is showing. We don't say that she's been sitting up for however long. We don't say that he's late getting home. We don't say that he's maybe having an affair from the lipstick on his collar. Instead, we just drop little breadcrumbs, and we assume our audience, intelligent as they are, will look at everything that you're showing them in that description and come to their own conclusion. Showing is often decidedly, by some, better than telling, but it is not so. Telling is very useful as well. It can be brief and informative. It can just drop some information right into the middle of the story. For instance, her husband was cheating on her. He came home late. Well, she waited at home for him until his food got cold and her feelings were hurt. And yes, that has all the narrative weight of me reading out a laundry list of the socks that needed to get washed last night. However, you can also use telling to be explicit, expository, and definitive with some candid details. For instance, this passage. My husband is cheating on me with his secretary, but he doesn't know that I know. So, I sit at home and I wait for him, book in hand with a false smile, imagine him railing that sweet little tart before returning home, pleading innocence, ignorance, and idiocy. Sorry? Never. Apologetic? Always. Consider the difference there between the different types of showing and telling and use them appropriately in your story. Showing will take more space and more text, and sometimes is unnecessary. Sometimes you just need to tell somebody that they got screwed by the car dealer or their secretary is cheating on them for whatever reason. Sometimes showing is the way to go. And so, for yourself, there's a bit of disenchantment. Showing is using description, nuance to leave all the puzzle pieces on the floor and point to it and say, solve it, reader. And telling is pointing to the puzzle box and saying, well, that's what's inside there. Now, go sort through those pieces. And another piece with telling is the unreliable narrator. You can have the narrator tell the audience something, and maybe they're lying. Let's continue our disenchantment of some things with a bit of a smudge, removing some of the things that are been told and repeated over and over and over. One of the things I like to talk about is perspiration, not inspiration. Trauma and mental illness, isolation and misery and poverty makes dead writers, not great writers. And devoting time and practicing and having interest in stories that give people unique experiences does make great writers. Anybody who knows me knows that I have a variety of issues, that I'm a very flawed human being. But I write despite my issues, not because of them. And my pain has not inspired me to create, but instead my desire to be understood has. And so, consider that. Another piece is the idea that inspiration needs to be this flowing thing that comes and appears and wafts down from the banister of the stairwell or on a sunny day, and suddenly the words flow through you. And yes, that does happen sometimes. But perspiration is more reliable. If you start wiggling your fingers on the keyboard or start speaking aloud into your dictation recorder, then you will start to have ideas form and the connections will be made, and you'll start to create. And more and more and more until eventually, like a snowball effect, what was once an arduous chore of the clacking of the keyboard will sound like music. And it is difficult. And Stephen King decidedly described it the best as sometimes sitting down at that keyboard is like walking into a monkey house. A quote that I often repeat. But you too are a monkey in your own way. We all are. And we're all monkeys on keyboards trying to tap out maybe the next great work. And I would say keep on typing, keep on creating. And yes, writing is lonely, hard work, but on the other side of it, there's a lot of joy that can be found. And I hope to inspire you to embrace the joy of writing. Now, another piece is the generative AI controversy. And to me, it's it's not actually a bad thing that there's lots of people doing this, because it weeds out people that aren't, well, they're not writers. They want to get rich writing. And the thing is, there's not a lot of money in this field, if I'm honest with you. There are, those individuals like George R. R. Martin or J.K. Rowling that have made gross millions upon it. But the majority of us, it will not be our bread and butter. However, there are some who do. And if you are among the lucky few that do, remember that your fame and whatever you get known for is like walking to a mud puddle. You get splashed when you're walking down the road one day, and that's just what you're going to be known for. And to embrace that, and that your fans maybe will only know you from that one big work that got a television series or a radio play or whatever interesting type of mediums you're enjoying in the future, like a holoprox or whatever. But you have one thing to be known for, and that's one more than everybody else in the world. And just in the same way that the Deep Blue programmer and the chess master who lost to it had a awkward interaction after the game. The chess master, approaching the programmer, asked what moves did he do wrong, and the programmer simply shrugged and said, "I have no idea." And I predict this will be the main conversation of any of those people that are using generative AI to create. I'm using rabbit ears above that, but you can't see it. So to me, it's not a controversy. They'll weed themselves out because we like stories told with feeling, and arranging a bunch of words into the most likely arrangement based on an algorithm, well, there's no feeling there. Sorry, not sorry. Another piece is looking at iteration, not perfection. And just say no to recursive revisions. Some people get stuck in trying to make a book perfect. I say finish your book, do your passes of editing, which I'll explain later, and then let it out, let it go. Or don't, keep it in a drawer, and maybe in 50 years, long after you're gone, somebody will be going through your things after your funeral, and they'll discover something wondrous and splendid. But don't get caught in the curse of recursive revision. Instead, finish the book, take the lessons from the book. And the thing is, you need to grow a thick skin when you release things. You will get, as I have been, insulted. You'll get maybe death threats, as I have. You will maybe be called every name in the book, even words deemed unfit for print. But at the end of the day, it is important to remember that you're creating something, and that takes courage. And a lot more courage than the critics that'll make fun of you. I'd like to tell you a brief anecdote of my early days as a writer. I was publishing some short stories in a newspaper back when that was still a thing. And I had professors in my university pulling apart my story in front of their class, the English professors, making fun of it, mocking every single character I had written, saying that I wrote as if my English was written by a second language person, or that perhaps I'd conjured this while intoxicated. Well, I, however, had gotten contacted by a group of fans who took me out to a dinner, and there, for 3 hours, they asked me questions about my work, and I got to eat more sushi than I could possibly imagine. Well, not sushi, I had yakisoba beef, but it was at a sushi place. And so those people that had met me at Osho's some 20 years ago were my first ever fans, and it was my first ever fan meeting. And all those critics who are pulling me apart, they will never have fans demand to sit and talk to them for 3 hours. But I did. I got that. And those are some of the gifts and the joys that you too can have by writing. It's lonely work. It's often thankless. And the pay stinks. But the thing is, if I didn't get paid to write, I would write for free, or I would pay someone to let me write. I would say, hey, here, take this handful of money. Let me go sit on the keyboard for another hour. Please, please, just let me keep writing. So, anyways, just a little anecdote for you. That yes, you're going to probably suck when you start. You're probably going to write things that stink. And I say that in all honesty because, well, a lot of my early stuff did stink. A lot of it, well, my first 4 books, I would say, weren't very good at all. And maybe I should have just sat on them and maybe started publishing after my 5th. But I let them out. Let them break out of the crib and wander about. And even though, like errant children can be frustrating, I am still proud of these works. Now, another piece is there's a bit of an interesting thing that I notice is that attention, you need to be intentional with your attention. So intention is very important. Your grass is going to grow where you water it. And so rather than sitting on forums and arguing about people about who sucks and why you're so great, your grass is going to grow where you water it. Instead, keep your eyes on your own page. Get back to making your own thing. Don't worry about the trends of what's cool and what's hot, because the lightning has already come and gone. Think of all the boy wizard stories and magical school stories and magical academy stories that came out in the wake of Harry Potter. And how many of those are still known today? Yeah, sure, a select few of them got their movie adaptations. Or you think of Stephenie Meyer's brilliant work of Twilight. What bottled lightning that was. A romance between vampires and werewolves in a fantastic romantasy that captivated the hearts of a nation. What a wonder that was. And yes, all kinds of pretenders came after, but none of them compared to that original. So be original. Make your own thing. Write what you're passionate about. Because what you are passionate about is going to shine through, not what someone else was passionate about. And that is why you might notice that all those other pretenders, none compare to the original. So, and then the last piece is ideas can be terrible. But we'll go into style and how when you use your own style, you can make anything interesting. But that's another slide. But again, what you're interested in and your style, your intention and your attention, all those things are going to help make your work in finding your voice. The last piece is the write what you know. Writing what you know is important, but it's only 1/4 of what you should be writing about. And so I like to use, as many viewers who have seen my other lectures, this unknown pyramid. One face of the pyramid is facing you directly. The known knowns of your life, the things that you know, the things that you've lived, your job, your experiences, where you grew up, your hometown, all those things. Another piece that you should be writing about in your books is things you know you don't know, and maybe doing some research. And knowing that you don't know what it's like because maybe, like yourself, you've never had the wealth or the opportunity to travel. And so while I get to look at picture books from Tashkent about these distant corners of the world, you can use your imagination and flesh out those things you know you don't know and add that mystery and wonder. Another thing on your pyramid of what you're going to write about, the unknown knowns, things you don't know, but you know. It's those family secrets like, why did Grandpa always keep a shotgun beside the bed? Or when you're standing at the fridge and you think about, wait a second, Endor would have been devastated by the destruction of the Death Star. A small moon being detonated inside its orbit. There's probably an apocalypse there. Those fridge moments. So write about the unknown knowns and the known unknowns. And lastly, the hardest one to write about, write the unknown unknowns. Things you don't know. And how can you write that? Well, that's a big challenge. It's like a black swan. Who could have predicted a black swan until you think about how obvious it would be that there would be a black swan if there's white swans? Another piece that is an issue is that words can only describe other words. And while reading broadly is very good, go and see broadly if you can, and travel broadly if you're fortunate. For me, I've had to settle to see broadly, and anybody who's been on my channel knows my love of picture books and texture books, because sometimes holding a piece of fabric in your hands will tell you a lot more about what it would be like to wear that piece of fabric. You could never maybe own a shirt that is made of it. And of course, living broadly is best. But don't go out and try to emulate some yahoo like myself. If you've already lived broadly, then you've got a broad range of experience to draw from. Myself, I've worked in a variety of fields: air traffic controllers, psychoanalyst, camera salesman, electronic salesman, video game salesman, liquor, liquor and gambling, you name it. All kinds of different fields and all kinds of different jobs. And a lot of them didn't pay very well, and all I got for it was some splinters and a tax receipt, but it informs my writing. So sometimes an experience you're having the only thing it might be good for is sticking in a book someday. Terroir, let us take a look at the term terroir and how that applies to you emerging as a writer. Who are you? Where did you come from? What was your family like? What kind of jobs have you worked? Were your parents together, or did they divorce? Did you go to a private school, public one? Were you raised by wolves on a mountainside? All these things will go into your terroir, a term from vinting wine, where the certain peculiarities of the soil, the weather, the wind, and the environment all go into the flavor of a wine in ways that cannot be replicated anywhere else. And this is also true for brandy and cognac. Brandy, you can grow that anywhere, but cognac can only come from the cognac region. Thus, the same with champagne and sparkling wines, or tequila and mezcal, or that delicious buttery Black Sea caviar that is just oh so good that you got to use a mother of pearl spoon because a metal one will just spoil the flavor. So consider the difference between yourself and someone else born the same year on the same day but in a different part of the world, and what kind of artist you'll become. Myself and J. Cole, two very different people born on different sides of the world in very different circumstances, but both on the feast day of Thomas Aquinas. That is the difference terroir can make in you as an artist. So consider where you've come from and where you've gone. What are your passions because of that? What are your experiences? And all those things are going to go into what you find most enlightening, appealing, and delightful as a writer. Finding your new voice is often thrown around, and I think sometimes part of your environment is all the books you're exposed to when you're young. I was reading lots of Conan the Barbarian and H.P. Lovecraft, and it shows through my early work especially. And as I grew older, I got more exposed to certain science fiction, like the Soviet sci-fi book Roadside Picnic, probably one of my biggest inspirations. And so for yourself, one of the biggest challenges is you need to write out all of the stuff that you're trying to ape and emulate and pretend to be, all the quotes, all the homage, all the references. Write them all out of yourself. And so my first 4 books, they were full of that. Flammarion Syncope is basically me aping Hunter S. Thompson, a first-person narrative of a bizarro experience in suburbia. When I look at my second book, Harkin the Hellhound, it was very much me pretending to be Frank Herbert and imagining, look at me, I'm writing this bizarre fantasy novel that switches from perspective to perspective, sometimes from one paragraph to another. Witch-Killer Kaya was obviously inspired by Game of Thrones, and Greymalkin was, the Scottish play, but with some shape-changing werewolf monsters. It was only by my 5th book, where I'd written most of those words out of myself, and suddenly I stopped aping these other writers and started to find my own voice. And instead of relying on homage and quotes and references to these other works that I wanted to be like, I finally had crawled out of Grandpa Tolkien's backyard and George R.R. Martin's yard sale, and I'd found my way into my own realm. And that is the Enzabel universe that you all read about now. So exercise all those old voices out of you. Write them out of you. Push and push and push. And once you've written them out of yourself, every word somebody else has said to you, all those quotes and sayings and terms of phrase, you don't need to use them. You don't have to say, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. You can use something like, in my time travel novel, that's just the way the clock spins. So that's a big piece of you emerging as a writer, is writing out those voices. Another piece is your style. Now the thing is, style will make something boring interesting. Consider the power of Hunter S. Thompson's checking into the hotel scene in Fear and Loathing Las Vegas. That is a very boring scene if it was written by any other writer, but only Hunter could make checking into a Vegas hotel room interesting because of his style. It is not about the boring person standing at the desk and this and that. Instead, it's countercultural, it's cutting, and it's downright hilarious. That's the power of your style. You can turn the things that maybe you've experienced or you found interesting into gold, where other writers would stutter, stumble, and fall. The power of your style translates also into when you are going to be meeting people and reading to people and talking to people about your work. Consider Chuck Palahniuk. I'd gotten to go to one of his readings of Guts. It was a few years after Fight Club had been in vogue, and he was in Calgary, Alberta. I'd gone to his reading at Chapters. I'd arrived late, and so there wasn't much time for me to get my autograph from this great writer, and I never did, because the power of his style made it so that people were fainting in the audience as he read from his book Guts, and I myself, to stop myself from fainting, had to leave the bookstore, woozy and dizzy from his lurid description. I had to go sit in my car, and by the time I had mustered my courage and my stomach had stopped churning to return, the book signing was already gone, and Chuck Palahniuk I would probably never get to see and get that autograph. So, your style has power, and I would like to close with this talk on style piece with a parable from therapy. A lot of times when I was training young therapists, they would emulate other therapists they had seen, whether it was myself, I would emulate Fritz Perls early on. Well, other people would be very much like Carl Rogers or whoever. The people that trained us, that we had watched repeatedly in our training videos, as well as the ones that our professors were like, a lot of the times you could hear their voices in them. You need to find your own voice. And Yalom had a beautiful quote at the end of one of his books, where a old rabbi dies and he goes to the pearly gates, and standing at the entrance is an angel, and the rabbi bows his head and says, "Oh yes, angel, I am very sorry. I know what you're going to say. Why couldn't you have understood and preached and taught more like Moses?" And the angel, of course, says, "No, I was going to ask you, why didn't you teach more like yourself?" So consider yourself to create a wildlife preserve. What media do you consume? Don't just consume it wholesale. In fact, one of the biggest blocks to my creativity and the biggest thing that freed me was I cut out television from my life. And after Bush got reelected, I've really disconnected from the news and the media. So I would say for yourselves, consider how you preserve your terroir. Don't let the construction crew come in there and tell you that steampunk is what's hot and that's what you need to write, because somebody else has probably already written that great steampunk thing, because if that's not your jam, that's not your jam. And they call it programming for a reason. The last piece of terroir is, what kind of writer are you? How do you write? Do you sit down and let the stories flow through you? Do you plan and plan and plan some more? Are you somewhere in between the two? Or are you like me? You roll dice and you do things randomly. The gardener lets their stories grow organically. They don't do planning, and if they do, they just watch the seeds grow, which unfortunately can grow into messy tangles and ambling plot lines, as I found early on. The architect, of course, is planning, and some more planning, and drafting plans, and drawing out their plot lines and webs. But for me, that was quite boring. And so, as I'm a gambler. I roll dice, I figure out who's going to be in the story, and then I roll the dice. And just like the universe, sometimes somebody can be perfectly skillful, perfectly good, but because the dice rolled a 1 instead of a 20, that person fails, and the other person who rolled a 20 succeeds, even though they didn't deserve it. And so, consider your terroir. Consider how you create, and what you create, and what creations you are consuming. The alchemy of writing is perhaps the most fascinating part. It's turning lead into gold. It is taking these inert symbols that sit on a page and making them become magical. So how do we do that? First of all, you need your alchemy lab. You need to curate a space, a place, and a time that you can create in. And if you are devoted to this craft, you will find a way. For instance, I would sometimes write on my lunch break when I worked at a government office, writing some poems in my books. And understand that these words are powerful. You are able to make addictive squiggles on paper that cause synesthesia and catharsis. And some people will hallucinate while reading your words. Isn't that magical? That's incredible. And for you or for me, some people will say, oh, but it's just a story. Well, stories are how we understand ourselves, how we make sense of our worlds. And when I'm doing therapy with people, sometimes that's the only way that I've found to heal some of them, is to get them to re-author their life in the form of a story that they're in the middle of. If they were looking at a character faced with the same problem, what would you want that character to do or not do? Are you going to let them go in the shed and get attacked by the axe murderer? Or are you going to get them to run away from this addiction or trauma that's been haunting them, like the Jason character in those slasher movies? So words are power, and be responsible with that power. Another piece is writing every day. I love writing, so for me, it's a joy to be able to write every day. It's like telling somebody that you can eat ice cream every single day and you're not going to gain a pound. Oh, goodness. What a dream that would be. Cotton candy ice cream every day. That's my favorite flavor. Nice. But you don't have to just write. Sometimes it can be difficult, but you can always research. You can go see something new. You can go do some studying. You can even read somebody else's works, because reading will inform you, hey, this is good writing and I like it. And sometimes you need to read some bad stuff too, so you can say, wow, I could write better than this. Another piece is be anything but boring. Don't be a pinwheel. Don't follow trends. Don't do the whiz-bang opening where you have to open the book like somebody else has already done. Be anything but boring, but don't be a pinwheel. Make sure that you're making stuff that you are passionate about. Don't try to follow the trend that somebody else has done. But we've visited that enough in the last one. Another piece is don't let friends write fan fiction. As Melkor, who is Morgoth, was unable to create anything new or unique, you miss out on the craft of writing by doing fan fiction. You don't learn how to make your own characters. You don't know how to world build. You're not learning about writing your own plots. Instead, you're importing some original character into a world that already exists, and you miss out on all the hard lessons that are only won by sitting down and making stuff that sometimes doesn't work. And so, I'm now on, I think, my 15th novel. And have any of them become these great halcyon Hollywood tales? No. But I've created these new worlds, and each one gets newer and stranger, and I can't wait to show you what other new places I can see in my mind. And the last piece is to receive. You must give. It's the oldest law of alchemy, is equivalent exchange. Writing is lonely work, and you're going to sacrifice time, relationships, money, energy, and sometimes, depending on the era you live, even your life. But there is power in your words, and there is beauty in them. And that sacrifice is difficult to make. And I can say that because I understand it. How many holidays have I just stayed at home and written instead of going and traveling? Because to me, I could go and see this world, but I'd rather explore the world in my mind. And also, it's a heck of a lot cheaper. And let's not mention the war or the economy, because I've mentioned it once and I'm not going to mention it again. Here are some of my tips and tricks and some enchantments I've found myself that I'd like to share with you. First, you might have noticed, anyone who's read my work, is I write in fractals. There's infinite detail in these worlds, but audiences find it attention. And so what do I do is, just as a shoreline, you can draw a straight line from the tip of Florida all the way to Montreal and measure the distance from one to the other. Just in that same way, you can take one of my stories and notice that some characters in the background suddenly get their entire own book. You just have to zoom in, and each person and place has these stories layered upon stories. One of my favorite examples of this is in the book Grassfinch. Fractal storytelling at its finest. One character is the serial killer terrorizing the city. Another character is the cop trying to catch him. They only interact once, briefly, during an exchange in the lobby of a police station while he's returning a purse. The purse of the third character, who is mugged in the second chapter of that purse. All three of these characters intersect at that point and go their separate ways, showing this exquisite detail and giving the illusion of a much bigger world than what I was able to muster. And so write in fractals. Have a character that's a side character, maybe become the main character of another book. One of my favorite examples of this in other media was the entire chapter of The Invisibles, graphic novels, where you follow the life and times of one of the thugs of the evil corporation who dies in a single panel, and that's it. Another piece that I find very effective is write in the medium that your work is going to be in. For instance, if your book is going to be published in 6x9, try writing the book in a 6x9 format. The pages fill up a bit better. You're able to get an understand of how the eye is going to move along. You're going to see how the paragraphs pile one on top of another. And if you have that much control over the format, like you can have in a independent publishing format, then what fun you can have with the fonts and the format sizing and the word spacing and making sure it's aesthetic to look upon. One of my greatest things, and Thompson Highway, I must credit him for his very, very wise words that took me probably a full 20 years to finally act on, is that your language is like a window, and if you only have one window, you only have one way to look at the world. So what windows do I use? Well, there's some English, there's some Latin, there's Cyrillic, there's Biblical Hebrew, and some Proto-Semitic. And all these languages pile up. And I find that learning another language with different glyphs, so not just using Latin, the Latin glyphs that we're all familiar with that appear in French and German, etc., but learning other languages that use different letters will even broaden those windows and maybe even punch in different doors so you can see different worlds. And so I encourage you, not just read broadly with your own, but try to learn other languages, even if it's just learning that alphabet and some key phrases and some interesting words and ideas from it, because you will broaden your horizons and create more windows into your world. Another piece is you do have to understand the law of languages. There's grammar, there's spelling, there's punctuation in words, and those things will help the audience make sense of what you are putting down. And so you do need to have a certain mastery of it. But do not be bound by it, because even these rules change and shift over time. And so that is where chaos comes in. Make up new words, or get rid of words you don't like. I don't use the English word for the season before summer. I always use Gwanwyn, the Welsh word for it, because I find it much more beautiful. And when I do use the word spring, it's to refer to the coils of metal on a couch or water pouring out of a hillside. Another piece is your rhythm of how you're saying it. Yes, punctuation is important, and yes, the full sentence, and subject, verb, object, and object, verb, subject, and da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da. But rhythm will let you be able to tell stories when you tell them with rhythm in a different way that maybe you wouldn't have thought possible. And the last is, yes, there are words, but there's also the subtext. And anyone who went to school with me knows of my great love of Pinter, particularly the play Betrayal, and the wonderful subtext that is expressed in certain scenes, like the line, "Book good?" Now let me tell you a bit about my process for creation. My first draft is dictation. I sit in front of my tape recorder and the words flow through me like a torrent. Words, 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 a flood. Maybe for you it's hammering on a keyboard, but as I've shared before, my sorry affliction when I had the Wuhan flu made it so I wasn't able to do that, but I needed to write in the same way I needed to eat. And so dictation became how I started writing my books back in those bleak days. And so the first draft of my books is dictated, and it's a flood of words. The second draft is going to be my hard edit. That is where I'm sitting down and reading aloud, and it's beaver time. I'm building dams and I'm cutting down trees. I'm making sure that everything's in there. I'm making it all make sense from that flood. And so with that is the hardest edit for me, because you're doing most of the work in there. The third edit is the fix it in post. I don't go back when I'm editing and writing. Instead, I just press forward and I'll just fix it in post, because you never know what you might be able to use or switch around, or even just use an entirely different book. In fact, my most recent trilogy, the Melody of series, I took all the stuff I cut, massaged it a little, and it's forming into the basis of the next book that will be released hopefully soon, Rubinstein. That is the fix it in post. And that's when you can listen to your characters, because by then, the first draft, you barely know these people. The second hard edit, they're maybe expressing themselves a bit better, but by the third, you would know what they're going to say. And sometimes, for me, it's like they stand beside me and say, "I wouldn't say that." This is where you're going to add your chrome. That's your foreshadowing, your symbolism. You're going to make it seem like all those things that happened by chance in that first draft were planned all along in the third. It's where you fix your plot. It's where you make sure that all the words are flowing nicely and looking good. The fourth draft and the fourth go through, that is your end game. That is my silent listen. I will sit and let the computer read it to me, and I listen, and I polish, I redact, I add arsenic and old lace, that embroidery, and this is sometimes where I will sprinkle in maybe some quotes, maybe some Easter egg references, because you put them in at the end, and then it's not you being informed and aping. It's you saying, hey, thanks, Shakespeare, for some of that. Or, hey, Hunter S. Thompson, do you remember that scene? I liked it too. What a good quote that was. Like, he who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man. And so this is where you put all those things in. If you want to, you don't need to. Because, like I said, you can make your own quotes. You're a writer. Do your own. You don't need to use somebody else's turn of phrase unless you feel like you want to. And that's, I think, the biggest shift for me. Is I went from aping people to being like, thank you. I'll include this because I want to include something hidden just between you and me. And if somebody else has read them as closely as I read them, they will see those two words like infinite jest or excellent fancy, and they'll have a chuckle knowing that I'm making a very subtle and sly reference to Hamlet speaking to Yorick's skull. Another piece is with creation is I'm an auteur. I don't have an editor. I realized early on I would never afford it. I can't afford to travel, let alone hire an editor. And so, sadly, it's all up to me. I have to make my covers. I have to edit my own books. And so it forces you to put on a lot of different hats. And if you are fortunate and wealthy, then please get an editor. My goodness. Sometimes I think of what could have been possible for my writing career if I could just find, the money to afford one. But, well, I write too much and too fast, and I would go beggar myself if I did, more so than I already am. Another piece with creation is understanding tropes. Some people are always like, I don't want to write anything tropey. I want to make sure everything is new and unique. Well, the thing with tropes is even if you try to avoid them, you will be just subverting it. You avoid one trope, creates another. The Jim Crow becomes the magical African trope, for instance. And so whatever tropes you're going to do, just be aware of them and know that you're going to try and subvert them and know that you're going to try and, do whatever you're going to do. But at the end of the day, these tropes are tools. They're shorthand. They're things that exist because even though we've been writing for as long as we've been writing, humanity hasn't changed too much. And the old tale of the poor boy falling in love with a rich girl from the different family was just as true in 1600 as it is in 2026, this foul year of our Lord. So understand that tropes are just tools, and understanding them makes them like that shadow. In the Jungian sense, once you understand and acknowledge that they're there, you have control over it. But as long as you say, I don't write with any tropes, well, guess what you're writing in running your story? The tropes. Characters, for me, are the joy of writing embodied. And I think it's maybe reflective in both my choice of profession as well as the wonder that comes from having good characters in my books that I enjoy. Anybody who's read my books will realize that a lot of times it's like I have characters that appear again and again that seem similar, just wearing a different hat. And that's because largely when I'm writing, the characters that are appearing, sometimes it's more like I have a theater company that appears and tells the story than a character that I'm conjuring from nothing. These characters, they've come back again and again in different hats and different roles, and sometimes a villain and sometimes a hero, but they're always coming back. In a similar vein to Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné. Sometimes he's an agent of chaos or order or harmony, but it's all these different characters that I just kind of let channel through me as I write. And that's why a lot of times when I'm writing, sometimes the character will be like, I wouldn't say that, don't put that down. And I don't, because I can listen to my characters because they're quite strong. Sometimes I do have characters that are just one-off stereotypes, and they're fun to use as well. And other ones are unique. But like I said, I have an ensemble cast rather than solipsism. I am not this lone creator inside a void. Instead, I call to the void, and these characters emerge from that darkness, stepping out and saying, acting out some of these scenes for me as I watch them. And so if you can get that, well, then you're right, creating kind of like I do. Anyways, another piece with characters is you can't force your audience to care about them, but you can trick them. You can use Kick the Puppy, where you have them do something awful to something that doesn't deserve it. A person, a place, a thing, an object, an animal. And that establishes this character is evil without you having to say Twisty McMustache is evil. By the same token, you can get your audience to hate. You can get them to love. And that is Save the Cat. Cats are notorious in being ungrateful, even to their saviors. You can pull them out of a tree and they'll still scratch your face. And so, having a character save a cat, whether it goes well or not, establishes that this person cares and is maybe worth caring about. Because if your audience doesn't care about your characters, killing them or not, putting them in a crisis or not, having them face a dragon or not, they don't care, so you might as well not do it. Another piece when writing characters is suspending judgment. Don't write a character, especially a perspective one, that you are judging inside. In fact, I believe that judgment is the source of all evil. And that the harshness of judgment, that overflow of judgment, is what causes the most suffering in our world. And so suspend judgment when you're making these characters, and you will find they come to you a lot easier. Because why would a character want to approach somebody if they know they're just going to get depicted poorly? So you think about certain characters like the judge in Blood Meridian. Yes, he is terrible and terrifying, but he is written entirely, despite his name, without judgment. He is never to me depicted as this evil thing that needs to be stomped and killed. Instead, he is an anomaly. He dances both in darkness and light, as he's written about. And he's a dancer and a devil and a liar and a truth teller all in one. And what an interesting character he is. Compare that to any other villain or anti-hero in any other book, and you will see the difference. Another thing to avoid with your characters is if they can be replaced by an object or MacGuffin. The sexy lamp. If your love interest can be replaced by a sexy lamp, well, then just maybe replace them with a sexy lamp that people are fighting over. Because if this person in your book has so little agency or words to say that they could just be an object, well, it might be better to just have that. Another piece is if your villain could be replaced, or your conflict could be replaced by a rogue bull that occasionally enters the scene and breaks things, like a bull in a china shop, then consider rewriting how your villain is portrayed. I'm not saying every villain needs a tragic backstory. In fact, quite the opposite. Some of the best villains either have no backstory or questionable backstory or nothing bad at all. Instead, they should have, perhaps, been just a wonderful good person based on their upbringing, and that's what makes the evil that they do even more baffling. People don't like baffling evil, though. They like it to make sense. But life doesn't make sense, and so sometimes your characters don't need to make sense either. Another thing to beware is the straw man or the sock puppet. Your political views, your religious views, all those views that you have. Maybe you think that you're going to impart upon your audience some wisdom, but chances are you're just going to annoy them. So instead of including people that are going to be beaten up easily, the straw man or the sock puppet, avoid those things. But most of all, avoid cabbage merchants. Nobody likes cabbage merchants. And if you put a cabbage merchant in your story, make sure they're losing everything over and over again. Because cabbage merchants are the scum of the earth. They're terrible. They go around hawking their cabbage with their stupid wagons, selling it, telling everybody to eat their cabbage because it's good for them. Since when has cabbage been good for anyone? That's right. Yeah. So cabbage merchants, I don't like them at all. And so, of course, I'm using a bit of humor there, but if you have something you're trying to sell to people, and you're trying to get people to eat their broccoli and read a story because it's good for them, that's a cabbage merchant. And don't be a cabbage merchant, because everyone hates cabbage merchants. And that's why nobody cries in that Avatar series when the cabbage merchant has his cabbage cart knocked over again and again because he earns it. He deserves it even. Anyways, sorry, a bit passionate there. Lastly, your clever celebrity similes will become a haliproxmemonon, so consider not using them. Now, of course, let me explain. In 50 years or 20 years, if your book is being read, nobody's going to know what Brad Pitt looked like, or Chloe Lamb looked like, or whoever the new hotness is in your era. Nobody's going to know. Just as when I make references to Richard Burton, nobody gets them nowadays. So consider not basing your descriptions or your characters on celebrities, because they'll be lost to time soon enough, and then it'll date it, which is okay if you're writing a period piece where it's very apparent that you're trying to do that, but also you might invite libel and other problems. And it's also just better to make your own characters. And how do you make them? Well, first of all, think about what kind of persons do you want to tell a story about? What kind of people do you want to have in the story? What are their curses? What are the things that afflict them? What are their traumas, their issues? What are their blessings? What are their gifts? What are they good at? What are their secrets? What keeps them up at night? What are the good things about them? What are the things that, they might be this, this, and this, but they're also this? And what are their sins? What are the bad things they've done that they feel guilty about, or not guilty at all that maybe they should? Another thing is Mary Sue and Gary Stu are often poo-pooed, but that can be written well. There's a very, very brilliant Schnee video on Reacher, and how he's typically would be considered a Gary Stu, but he's so well written that he's just a delight to watch. So you don't have to avoid them all together, but consider how you're presenting your Mary Sue or Gary Stu, and you can actually do it well, and maybe have a character that's endearing. But typically you want to have flaws for these characters and have bad things about them. Some flaws you want to avoid because they might endear, depending on your culture and where you're from, it's going to maybe alienate your audience too much and they won't be able to get over it. For instance, Harkin the Hellhound, my first book that is no longer in print, so I guess I can spoil it. He kills his own father, which is pretty unforgivable. So you do have to look at, it will basically damn the character for the rest of the series if you're writing a series. Another thing is avoid is Twisty McMustache, and this is just you see this with like an SVU villain. I used to watch Law and Order way back when, and Twisty McMustache was kind of like all these villains in it. Law and Order, they were always baby-eating monsters that had, like they were just deliberately made to be very clearly this one is evil. Like in Fargo, you think of the guy that puts the guy in the wood chipper, right? Like obviously, like this guy's just pure evil. So have some anomalies in those. And so even someone like that Austrian painter was a vegetarian and liked dogs, even though he did some of the worst things ever in recorded history, so much that we don't even speak his name now. Now think about another piece is with your hero having a foil, and also consider that your hero's flaws should reflect the conflict they're in. So Hamlet and Othello, if they were flip-flopped in their stories, then the entire conflict of the story would have fallen apart in minutes. Othello, hot-headed as he is, egged on by a ghost or his friend, would have gone up and killed the wicked uncle before the first night was done. Whereas Hamlet, thoughtful and very, very reflective, would not have just sprung to action at his friend's behest and goading. And consider their foils, Laertes versus Hamlet. They are also reflections of each other. Laertes would cut Hamlet's throat in a church, but Hamlet spares Claudius he prays, and then he slays Polonius by accident and is racked with guilt and upset because of this, but also his madness. Another piece is understand that you want to make sure that when you're making your cast of characters, have people that oppose each other. And I've seen this a lot of times in media as well as in stories I read. You have all the characters kind of agree on things, so they just kind of, there's no internal conflict within a group. But anybody who's done group therapy or been in a group project in school knows that you have some people that are rules followers, other people that are lazy, other people that are active, other people that are very passive. And so consider your dichotomies of chaos versus order. Who follows the rules and who enforces rules and who breaks them and who wants to run the other way of the rules. Consider who is greedy and who is altruistic, who is going to sacrifice for the greater good, and who is going to sacrifice others for their own gain. And lastly, who is active and who is passive. Passive characters have their place. Some people say, don't write passive. No. A passive character can frustrate the audience, which can be good, but don't make them too frustrated so they disengage. But same with active characters, the ones that are choosing their path and choosing to go do something. And the last piece that I do when I'm writing characters, I look at the perspective character as you have a rock that this character is stuck on that is breaking them, and they have a ship around it, and they're trying to move their life, their situation, their ship, and they're the captain of it. And they have other people around them, the crew, the storm, and the sea, and the sharks. And that captain has to stop the mutiny from happening amongst their crew. They don't want other people to betray them. You want to make, they're also at odds with the environment, whether it's a storm that's coming periodically or the sea is a constant threat. And also you have environmental threats like sharks that cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. And so when you think of each character having that rock, that thing that they're stuck on that they can't move past, that will help enliven your characters. Because a lot of times I find people are the same. Portals to other worlds. Your setting is my second favorite thing to create. Well, I guess judging by how many books I've just done, my world books writing, maybe it is my favorite. But setting is delightful. It's wonderful, but you have to decide, are you going to do an iceberg where there's a whole bunch behind the scenes the audience never learns that you created, or doing a facade like a theater stage? It's just forced perspective with the illusion of depth. Myself, world building sprawl, unfortunately, can happen where you just create more and more and more, and that's what I did for a 6-book series that I stopped really writing in. I used to have 15 books worth of world building written about it that are all just handwritten. So you do have to consider the sprawl. But creation is a joy, and you learn from it. So I won't dissuade you. Another thing is, I find when people are creating settings, especially fantasy ones, a lot of times it's just, well, it's Roman Empire with a different hat. Or it's a planet of hats. Everybody is X, Y, or Z. It's the planet of the apes and whatever. Now, the thing is that I find is if you want to create a unique culture or a new kind of culture or what have you, consider this. Your climate is going to inform the culture of the people living there because it's going to, the amount of free energy and food and shelter and other environmental things, what animals are there, are going to inform what kind of resources they can consume and how they live. And that culture will create a mythology as well as a society from that. And so whenever you're going to make something, instead, don't just switch a new hat onto the Roman Empire. Think about, okay, well, if I have an island where it's only birds and it's a bunch of people living on this island of birds, what would that look like for a culture? It's not going to be the Roman Empire, that's for sure. It's going to be maybe a lot of things about flight and flying and maybe colors, and maybe they're very colorful in how they dress, just like the birds that were around them. Maybe their primary god isn't a man in the sky with a lightning bolt, but a giant moa bird that walks around and can, sing magical songs that put the trees to sleep. And maybe, who knows what kind of wonderful worlds you'll be able to conjure from your imagination. When you keep in mind that the climate and environment is going to inform your culture, and that culture that's created creates a mythology around the climate it's forming from. Another thing is when you're engaging people in the setting, engage all those senses. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? And this can be hard, especially like me, if you live in a very remote part of rural Canada. and you've never been off the continent, then, well, it can be hard, but that's what picture books are for. And Taschen has a wide variety of, you want to imagine Soviet architecture and of the exotic East, or you want to, imagine the grime and dirt of far, far away Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Those are all things within your access by reading books and looking at picture books, and if you can, making a trip. But again, we'll move on. Another thing is avoiding slang and trending fashions and ideas of our time or your time, unless you are doing a period piece about your time. If you want to do a period piece about medieval Europe, then they're not going to have any of the things that they think that you think like. In fact, they would think you're bananas for thinking a lot of the things, and they'd probably burn you at the stake as a witch. And me too, probably. So you're in good company in that fire. So consider, when you are using anything from our era, how it will date your piece. And so that's one of the reasons I avoid a lot of trending topics and ideas. And with fashion, I do like to design the outfits myself because as you all know, I have a deep love of fashion. So, even though I dress all my men in Canadian tuxedos, that somebody has told me. But again, nothing would pull a reader out more of your period piece of a fantasy world than a knight saying, "Oh, that rosaceous lady, don't let her get yeeted by the giant." No, it's gonna pull somebody out completely. So, do whatever you want though, but just consider what you're creating and what's gonna pull people out of the setting and put them in. Engaging senses puts them in, including references to the here and now and our world, as mundane and boring as it is, will pull them out. Another piece of your setting, and this is where setting and character intersect, is the concept of the southern, the northern, the eastern, and the western. Everybody knows the western, so I'll do it first and spare you much of it, but that's the conquering of the wilderness by civilization, by hardy, individualistic heroes that are often morally dubious in a lawless land where anything goes. The Eastern is the opposite. Chaos is rising within a society, and individuals will need to endure or survive, and it's often those monster of the week stories, or the mutants, or the supernatural attacking our good order that follows the dead stay dead, and the humans are not turning into wolves. The Northern, there's an old joke in Canada that we never had a Wild West because the Mounties got here first, and it's very true. Mounties always get their man, so never piss off the RCMP. But the northern is that the law is just and deserves to be defended, and you have a humble hero. And you think of Law and Order, a lot of times those police procedurals or Star Trek, you have these characters in a vast frontier, and they are bringing order, but they're defending it, and they're also humble about it. They're not morally ambiguous. You're never going to have the Mountie who is nasty or morally dubious or doing something in a northern. It's very clear who the villains are. And finally, the southern is the law is corrupt and needs to get overthrown, and you have a righteous outsider entering and turning it on its head or getting consumed by the system in their process. Like Serpico or To Kill a Mockingbird, those would be examples of your southern. So consider what setting you're making, what the characters you're putting in, or how they're going to interact with it when you're making your setting. And you can do everything in between. You can do stuff just set in the real world, which can be really good, especially for a story where you're making it very personally, maybe about your life or something, and you want to just tell somebody about your life. Of course you're going to set it in the real world, unless you're like me and from an alternate dimension you can't get home. Other people, you're going to have maybe their, another story. It's maybe an ersatz Earth, and that's one of the things I like to do. I don't like to anytime where I'm setting a story like kind of in our era. I'd like to make it different enough that way I have a lot of creative license, because otherwise you're going to get a ton of people in the comments telling you, oh, that's not the capital of Montenegro anymore or whatever. And it's just easier if you're using like an ersatz Earth, making a few things that make it very clear, like they call it Albion and not England or something. And then finally, you've got high fantasy worlds where it's completely made up from your head, and it's all kind of new, sort of like Gerald Tolkien's Middle Earth. So those are the settings. Plot. Plot for me, I was taught, because I did theater, of course, it's my background with writing. I don't have a background in creative writing or English, so I have theater background. So I was taught, of course, early on was the 3-act structure, or 5-act, depending on how long your play was. But just kidding. So you have your inciting incident in the first, and the building of the characters. You have the rising action second, and you have your climax, and in your act 3, followed by your denouement. And so that's the big way things are done. And the thing is, that is done very much like the as I talked about before, the male orgasm. It's the rising action, the erection, and then the ejaculation, and then he falls asleep. So if you want to shake up your rhythm, and what I do in my stories, anybody who's read, I use the female orgasm structure, the yonic dance rhythm. You go from scary to safe. You do tension and release. You have action and reaction. You have pain and pleasure. You have all those kind of opposites in this dance of movement and stillness. And so you just have opposites facing each other again and again, and instead of just rising up and then down, you have it gets exciting for a little bit and then it's down, and exciting, and yeah, in the middle maybe of the story you actually might have maybe the most exciting moment, but you're still going to have exciting moments all the way until the end. It's just of different scales and at different types of excitement. And so consider all these kind of opposites and how you can do that dance. A very old one that I noticed was Tolkien does something similar in the format of The Hobbit. It goes from scary to safe. You start at the safe, it's in the Hobbiton, and then the dwarves show up and it's scary. And then they leave and it's kind of nice, they're in the mountains and it's safe, and then, oh no, there's trolls and they're going to eat us, that's scary. And they do that throughout the entire thing. And when you look at my book, yesterday we met at Strathcona Park, I do the plain pleasure dance. It starts out, it's very painful and humiliating. The character is selling their words on the street for survival, and then it's pleasure. Then they're off living it up, living their life, having fun with their friends, and I do that dance the entire time. And so think about the opposites that you can play with if you're going to do the ionic dance rhythm rather than the phallic climax structure. Another piece with plots, now with plot you have to look at is that your idea is less important than your style. And as I was talking about earlier, checking into a hotel room can be made interesting if you have cool style. And even though that idea is boring, and if you tell any other writer, write a scene about checking into a hotel room, their eyes will probably roll back in their head and they'll fall down in an epileptic fit. But Hunter S. Thompson could pull it off. And there's probably stuff that only you could ever write because you have a peculiar style. And something that anybody else would see boring, you could see as interesting. You consider the style between somebody who's from a desert country looking at a glass of water compared to somebody who lives on an island. Both are going to be in dearth of water, but for one, there's no water anywhere, and the other one, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Another piece that I find with plot is whatever you're going to do, whatever you were going to originally do, try to either make it weirder or worse. And so, for instance, in Faux Vu, of course, the story, it looks like it's going to be, it's a conspiracy against the government, and then it just gets so weird. And I won't spoil anything in case somebody in the audience, because it's only been out for a few years, but it's a very weird twist, and I still get questions about what was I thinking when I came up with that, and I won't answer you. So make it weirder or worse. Rather than whatever you're going to originally go with. And that will always make it more interesting. Because again, just don't be boring, right? Now, the biggest thing with the plot can be the 6 questions of writing. I forget who came up with these. It's in my old writing notebook when I was still learning some of these things. And this is a neat little thing that you can do. Who is the story about? What do they want? Why can't they get it? What will they do about it? What is their arc? How does it end? Very good 6 questions about anything that you're going to write. What I like to do with my plots is I silver line every dark cloud, and I fill every pinata with asbestos. So, whatever you're going to have happen, even if it's terrible, have something kind of interesting and good, and everything that's wonderful, have something, some price written on the bottom of that cup. So, you want to challenge, you want to struggle. When you're writing somebody fighting something, you want to set up your action as you're going to have challenge, struggle, disaster, and or victory. And another thing you can do that I like to do is the improv rules. So when in theater, improv, it's all about if you say yes and you're always saying yes to stuff, or you can say no, but you have to have a no but. Yeah. So yeah, the dragon we slayed the dragon, yes, and now we found out that the princess wasn't under the castle, or the bakery burnt down, but it had a really good insurance policy, and now we're millionaires. And there's a big hijinks plot about people trying to get the millionaire money from us. So with your plot, for me, as you guys know, I said earlier, think about what would be interesting. What are some interesting scenes? What is an interesting conflict for somebody to have? And for me, I really enjoy having like I said earlier, non-judgmental plot. Don't frame things as good or bad. Just, this is a thing that happens, and then something else happens, and the audience can read it and then make their own conclusions and question it. Be ambiguous with the plot. Don't say this is inherently good or bad, because like that old Tao story of the boy who gets thrown from the horse, you don't want to ever have it be apparent what is good or bad in the story. Instead, just have events happen and characters react to them, and you have something that this person wants and they're trying to get, or something that they don't want that they're trying to avoid. So that's plot. And now practice. This is just out in the field. What is it? What are some closing words for you? Well, it's the best and worst time to be a creative. The gatekeepers, those great gatekeepers are leaving their posts, and more it is more and more easy to be a writer, to create a lot, and to have more and more efficient tools. We don't have to sit on a typewriter and cut pages apart. Instead, you can do what took a writer hours to do on a typewriter or by pen. You can do it in minutes with a keyboard. So what a wonderful thing to be in. However, the other side is that you have a sea of messages in a bottle, and your story is just another message in a bottle being thrown into that sea. And so the challenge, of course, is getting people to pay attention to your story. And if you figure out how to do that, well, let me know, because I'm on the make. Another piece is the paths to publishing are out there. There's literary agents and self-publishing. If you are very, very lucky, or you have that je ne sais quoi, then get that literary agent. Get that publishing deal. I've never been able to get one. They won't even return my phone calls. So, I've done the self-publishing route, and I'm about 15 books in. But each is a double-edged sword. Your literary agent, there's a lot more fingers in the pie. There's a lot more editorial stuff. There's a lot more people to please. With self-publishing, yes, you have a lot more creative control, but also you're the only one tooting your own horn, so you have to toot it long and loud, and eventually some people are going to be like, please stop. But you're not going to, because I'm not giving up, and neither should you. Another piece is, welcome to Disneyland, man. Safety is not guaranteed with writing. You're going to have rejection, insult, disappointment, and even death, depending on where you live, depending on what you write. So understand that writing, even though people are like, oh, these are just stories, they are serious business. And you need to take your art seriously and love it seriously. Another big piece that I would say is beware of Dracula. There's people out there that are going to suck you dry if you let them. They're going to scam you, they're going to flam you, they're going to be bad teachers that give you bad advice, there's going to be mean peers that try to slash your tires, there's going to be dumb critics, there's going to be paid reviewers that scam you, and I have gotten to encounter, unfortunately, all of these things throughout my time writing. So just beware of Dracula, and even my own advice in here, I know it was kind of drinking from a fire hose, and each of these slides could have been its own lecture, but some of my advice will not work for you. And I'm not out here to drain you dry, though. All I'm trying to do is tell you, after about 15 novels and being able to write as much and as fast as I can, well, maybe I know a few things, and hopefully some of this will help you build some confidence so that you can understand that, you know, you have it too. You have the ability to write lots and write greatly, and it's about practicing repeatedly. And that's my last piece. So go sit down, write your book, and be so good, as Steve Martin says, that they can't ignore you. Further study. Like I said, I never took creative writing or English courses in my university, and I guess it shows. But I do have a few things that I have taken that have been helpful. So Building Great Sentences, Exploring the Writer's Craft by Books Landed on Audible is wonderful. It is probably, I really enjoyed that one. And I know that this probably sounds like I work for Amazon or Audible. I don't. This is not a paid promotion. It's a really good course. And the way the guy, like, I listened to the course, of course. A horse, of course. So, if you read it, I don't know how the book is, but I listened to the entire thing, and the way the guy reads it is just delightful. And so that was one of my favorite ones, and has helped me really understand, building great sentences. And there's also a lot of other great courses plus that are really great and wonderful resources if you need to do research. There's a whole entire series on Mesopotamia and all kinds of stuff. And, you can hop over to my Audible and pick up some of my books if you follow the link down below. But, at the end of the day, again, read broadly, learn broadly. The world is full of all kinds of cool things. And if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. Another thing is YouTube can be a good resource. Just be aware of who you watch. There is expert novices, and I encountered some of those. So there's a redacted writer. I don't even give attention to people I won't even name them if I don't want to give negative attention even to somebody. But they basically wrote 2 fiction books and then 2 how to write books. And the fiction book they wrote was a stinker. But again, it's you have to be aware of these novice ones that maybe they haven't written a ton, and maybe they're giving a lot of weird advice. And myself, there's probably somebody down in the comments saying I'm the same, but and that's okay. They can believe whatever they want. And the last thing is that the best way to learn to write and study to write is by writing. So be dangerous, be daring, and write what you want to read. Give your people that are reading books experiences. And remember, fame is just a mud puddle that you're going to step in. And if it does happen, it does happen. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you can still give people wonderful experiences with your words, even if they're maybe just a small cult following like I have. So hello to my fans over in Russia and in Brazil and in Iran and in China and in Japan and America and those few scattered around Canada. So thank you so much for reading my books and enjoying my words. And I hope that there's many other countries added to that list of people that are enjoying my books. Oh yes, and I have somebody who picked up my entire trilogy in Australia just last week. So thank you so much, all of you. And I'm hoping you enjoy my words, and I'm hoping that you will have lots of fun reading them and sharing them, and that my wild, wacky stories will bring you joy in this very weird and somewhat terrifying era in which we're all living. And my last and my only sound piece of advice in this entire lecture is the following. Don't eat the foil on the Easter eggs.